Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War, Warhammer 2 Quick Match gameplay. This time around we are on the map Lost Crater, playing once again as the Empire against the Brettonians, and what I've really been trying to try out and really hone the cavalry strategy against Brettonia. So, once more we are running a pretty similar strat, and I've been finding that Empire cavalry can actually dominate Brettonia pretty effectively. If Brettonia decides to bring a good amount of Grail Knights, your cavalry is still fairly tanky, and your Demigryphs and Royal Griffiths can still trade rather effectively with Grail Knights, especially if you abuse the heck out of Net with the Light Wizard, make use of Karl Franz and his buffs, and have an Empire Captain and Outrider support to really back you up. And the enemy infantry can really be dealt with by a Reichsguard, because honestly, Brettonian infantry generally lacks armor piercing. The few troops that are kind of dangerous can be dealt with by Outriders with grenade launchers. So as you can see here, for this composition, I did bring Karl on a horse. I really don't think it's necessary to put him on any sort of fancy barded warhorse, or much less Deathclaw, because really Deathclaw only gives you a bit of mobility and Blood Roar and Terror. But otherwise, most of what you need from Karl, he can provide you with on a horse. Alongside him, I didn't bring a Light Wizard, as mentioned before. This time around, experimenting a little bit with magic. We did still bring the Power Stone, of course, the Net of a Mintok, which I think is great, and actually kind of been buffed. Frost Protection, of course, for that survivability, cheap survivability. And then Baroness Time Warp, which I'm definitely looking forward to trying to get that boost of speed, as well as that boost to melee attack. And this is really a pretty powerful spell that I think people kind of underestimate just because of how Net it tends to be the spell of choice when using Lure of Light. Now you can also overcast it and get an increased effect area, which could definitely be helpful if I'm trying to maximize my cavalry usage. This Empire Captain here will provide me with a little bit of staying power. He can soak up charges pretty effectively just because he's a single model entity, and all that sort of stuff. A front line of Reichsguard, basically replacing my infantry. These guys have monstrous armor, okay melee stats, decent weapon strength, and a decent charge bonus. They're just kind of decent all-rounders that can basically outtrade most of what Brettonia can put on the field. Everything, with the exception of, I do believe, Questing Knights that Brettonia has in the 1100 and below range, these guys can take on. You have our riders with grenade launchers there, just to tear apart squishy infantry. The Royal Griffiths, as well as the Demigryph Knights with halberds to deal with heavy cav, and then 2 units of Outriders to deal with, once again, more heavy cav, flyers, that sort of stuff. So without further ado, we're going to kind of throw things into motion, though, of course, my opponent here has 2 units of Mounted Yeomen. Decent choice against Empire just because they're pretty quick and they can get into your backline, and these guys are going to engage on my Outriders almost immediately. Over here, for my opponent's front line, it is definitely very cheap. It is backed up by a Paladin, actually, to provide some moral support, as well as just help soak up damage. Honestly, not a terrible choice. Much like the Empire Captain can stiffen up an Empire front line, Paladin can do the same for Brettonia. You can see here it's a mix of men-at-arms with shields, battle pilgrims. Really, actually, a pretty solid combination against Empire. This will trash most Empire front lines with relative ease. They are backed by some spearmen arms for that anti-large, and some peasant bows just to provide some range fire. And these guys can actually brutalize Outriders, for example, pretty effectively, just because they have so much quantity of fire. Knights Errant, of course, over here, fairly cheap but efficient cavalry unit, backed up by 3 units of Knights of the Realm. Obviously, these guys aren't Grail Knights, but combined with a pretty massive infantry contingent, these guys will be pretty potent. You can see the Mounted Yeomen already being shot by the Outriders. Lewin is actually mounted on a horse, which means no armor piercing for him. In my opinion, that's one of the big problems with Lewin, and honestly most lords in general, is that if you don't put them on a monster's mount, they don't get armor piercing. Their melee stats tend to be a little lackluster. You can see here, 300 and 150, compared to Karl Franz, who is sitting at 140 and 330. So Karl Franz hits like an absolute truck against Lewin. Then my opponent does have a single unit of Questing Knights here just to deal with armor. Against Reichsguard, for example, especially in Lance Formation, these guys will be absolute nightmares. Over here you can see my Outriders are being engaged upon. I do try to flee with them, and I do start shifting my Demigryphs to halberds to save them. Demigryphs are actually faster than Reichsguard by a good bit. They have 75 speed, but you can see the Outriders are definitely getting caught. They're getting kind of beaten down, and they're going to start taking losses. And you can see the Outriders definitely getting beaten here. I'm losing models, which is definitely not what I was looking for. But you can see the Demigryphs do get a nasty charge here. And these Mounted Yeomen are not going to be long for this world. Against the heavy armor and just monstrous abilities of the Demigryphs, they're really no match. Now over here you can see I did net the 2nd unit of Mounted Yeomen. The main reason for that, of course, is because I can't get the Demigryphs into them as quickly. And that will allow the Outriders to kind of sneak away without too many losses. Though obviously I've lost about a quarter and about maybe like a 1/6 or so of a unit of these units of Outriders. In the meantime, my main contingent of infantry is kind of pulling back, just retreating, while the Demigryphs massacre these Mounted Yeomen here in the pits. You can see just kind of really laying the smackdown on them. And they did take some very heavy casualties, lost a bunch of models. And they're really not going to be not really going to be very capable. And they're just kind of going to get dragged down into the muck here. As you can see, they do ride off, and my opponent will be able to just rally them outside of range. And of course, Demigryphs can't really help. Now, unfortunately, some arrow fire is coming in on the Outriders with grenade launchers, but I'm pushing in with the Demigryph Knights with halberds, just trying to kind of squeeze in, perhaps get a charge, and just trying to scare my opponent a little bit, force him to move his cavalry to respond, and just trying to force out a reaction. My Outriders, in the meantime, are shifting to flank where the archers are not, just to apply pressure to my opponents. Heavy Cav, which of course they can kite. Over here, Light Wizard does plow into the men-at-arms with shields, getting a little ahead of himself, but that's okay. And in the meantime, grenades coming down the battle pilgrims, doing some immense damage. You can see they dropped to 4,800, which compared to the starting of HP of 6,000 is huge. That means they lost about a fifth of their HP in a single volley of grenades. Over here, Spearman Arms do try to soak up the charge from Reichsguard, but of course Reichsguard is just a monster. You can see these battle pilgrims are already falling apart, as are these men-at-arms. And of course, without the support of Grail Relic, they're really not going to have the morale to stick around. In the meantime, of course, grenades still wailing away, doing immense amounts of damage, melting these these battle pilgrims and these men-at-arms with shields. Karl Franz is in the fray. He's popping his buffs. He's got the Reichland Runefang, Gulmraz, and all that stuff going down, and the Reichsguard are plowing in behind him, and they're going to tear through the infantry very quickly, and then they should be able to deal with the heavy cav in turn. And of course, most of this infantry can't actually deal with Reichsguard. They're just not really good. King Lewin is getting stripped down despite his regen. Of course, Karl just hits like a truck, as we mentioned before, and his stats right now are through the roof, and especially thanks to Barona's Time Warp, which is buffing all of my cavalry here in this area. The Royal Gryphites are plowing in. They're going to start being able to strip down the enemy cavalry and really provide some nasty support to these Reichsguard. In the meantime, the Outriders with grenade launchers proving immensely useful against the peasant bowmen. You can see annihilating them there with volleys of grenades. And in the meantime, Lewin does go down. Karl and the Royal Gryphites is able to kind of drag him into the muck. You can see Karl's definitely not in the greatest of health, but he definitely did lay the smackdown there. Empire Captain over there just tying my opponent's troops down. In the meantime, these Outriders are kind of skirmishing around, being a nuisance, though definitely not the best of micro on my part. My opponent's mounted yeomen, in the meantime, are sitting around over there, not being useful. As my grenades start raining in, and you can see they're going to start tearing through this blob of infantry. And they can arc over your troops, and even if they couldn't, honestly, or didn't arc as well, Demigryph Knights with halberds and Reichsguard are rather well armored, so they're very, very tanky against this sort of stuff. They're very, they're very resilient against these grenades. And you can see these infantrymen are just breaking. Of course, with the fear and terror being applied, this is just very, very bad for my opponent. Despite getting some charges in, it's really not looking very good for him. Knights of the Realm sticking around. You can see these Knights of the Realm over there as well. But by and large, these questing Knights are routed. My opponent doesn't have any healing, and definitely in a bit of a rough spot. I do try to pursue with the Outriders here, using them as a sort of pseudo light cav, but not getting the greatest of results. I do manage to intercept these mounted yeomen over here with Karl, kind of. They do snag a few of these Outriders with grenade launchers, and they're then going to get run down by questing Knights most likely. So that's definitely a little bit of a problem. Anytime over here, these mounted yeomen, I'm trying to snag them with the Light Wizard. But really here in the pits, which is where the main fight is going down, and that's really where the most significant sort of engagement is going. You can see the Outriders actually gained almost an entire chevron there just because of the damage they were doing. But really where the main battle and the most important fighting is going on, I'm winning decisively. The Reichsguard, the Demigryphs, the Empire Captain are just dragging these Knights of the Realm into the muck, massacring them, and really giving my opponent no opportunity to recover. He has, of course, lost Lewin. Questing Knights, despite having that AP, are not going to be a match for the Demigryph Knights once they get in on top of them. And with another Barona's Time Warp going down, these guys are in for a really, really bad time. Questing Knights also don't have the best of armor, which I think is worth mentioning. So that they kind of get massacred by Empire Cav in that sense, too, sometimes. Over here, the Outriders are trying to kind of pursue and harry these mounted yeomen, sniping them away, but I do lose my other unit of Outriders over there. But now my opponent's army does kind of rout after what was a bit of a grind in the center. So honestly, not the greatest of cavalry usage there, not crazy good cycle charging or anything like that, but definitely getting a good performance out of these troops. In general, I do think this is a pretty competitive build against Brettonia, and I've actually been surprised by just how effective it is. The Outriders prove to be really useful against the Brettonian heavy cav. Outriders with grenade launchers massacre enemy infantry when they try to blob up on your cavalry. The Light Wizard can provide really great tactical support. And then the Reichsguard, of course, it's just such a good shutdown for anything the Brettonians put on the field as far as infantry is concerned. And the two Gryphites, or the two Demigryph Knights, can really kind of counteract enemy heavy cavalry. If your opponent brings a whole bunch of Grail Knights, then you might be in trouble. But you can always try to kind of finagle around it, try to net them, try to get critical nets, and pick a fight and force a fight in a situation that favors you. Make use of your Outriders, that sort of stuff. Definitely, though, great to give it to my opponent, Ryan 355 here. As you can see, the losses were definitely much worse for me than they were for him. It was simply a matter of shattering and breaking that Brettonian army. And as you can see, I've really kind of assassinated his key units here, that heavy cavalry and his two lords, and the Lord and Hero, and that really set me up for a win. Whereas my opponent, while he did manage to shut down my Outriders, in no small part due to my own clumsy play, he really wasn't able to shut down my core troops of Karl and the 2 heroes, as well as the Reichsguard and the Demigryphs, and they just kind of stuck around to win the game, whereas these blobs of infantry, of course, can't win the game. Nonetheless, great game to my opponent, as mentioned before. I do hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe down below. If you have any comments, criticism, anything like that, be sure to share them, and I'll respond as soon as I can. As usual, guys, I do appreciate you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Wyvern out.